Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session. Today we have Aman Misra with us. Aman Misra is a deaf journalist and a media researcher. Alongside his mother, Mayura Misra, he runs the independently owned Storyteller Bookstore. Storyteller Bookstore is a women-led bookshop based in Kolkata and has been in the retail business since 1991. Aman is currently a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville's College of Communication and Information. His area of research revolves around media archival research of the disability sports movement in the global south. Hi, Chetan. So, Aman, our first question today for you is tell us about the origins of the Storyteller Bookstore.
I guess it would probably go back to the late 80s or the early 90s. My parents had by then settled down in the city of Calcutta. My father's a practicing chartered accountant, and my mother originally, very interestingly, wanted to become a professional athlete. She wanted to become a professional golfer. She was a ranked golfer in the 1980s, and she actually grew up alongside men and women who are now pioneers of the Indian game, essentially. And while that sort of did not work out for her in terms of sponsorships, in terms of being a woman trying to make it in professional sports and things of that nature, she eventually got a job at this place, which was a magazine subscription agency, where back in the 80s and the 90s, if you wanted any of these architecture digests, or you wanted Scientific American, you didn't have Indian versions of these magazines at that point. You didn't have South Asian editions, so all of these would still come from North America, and her job was to ensure that that she would get more subscriptions in the city of Calcutta, and that she would ensure that these magazines reach the subscribers at that time. That's how she sort of got into the publishing industry, and she did that for a while. She worked for a few people, and the name of the organization was Oxford Subscription Agency. It was on Shakespeare Sarani, if anyone's familiar with Calcutta. And I think the gentleman who owned it, he left for New Delhi, and he sold the firm to my mother. And this was sort of the early 90s, when you had the liberalization, the LPG going on, the economy in turmoil, a bunch of different things happening, at the same time. That's when she sort of realized that a lot of these magazines were now setting up South Asian editions, and therefore, reducing her profits. So, somebody wouldn't necessarily buy a Scientific American, North American edition. They would try and maybe buy the Indian one. So that's when she saw, and what was happening is that a lot of the places one of the many places which she would end up, working on these subscriptions were getting to a lot of libraries, and a lot of these libraries was starved for children's books, and they would or say back then, if you had a child who would want children's books, you would have to wait for an aunt, who was coming from the UK, or someone who's coming from the US or something, to get like the latest Enid Blyton, or to get something like that. And she sort of saw this, and she decided that she would start specializing in children's books. Initially, for the first 10-15 years of her bookshop, she did not specialize in children's books. It was one of the things that she was doing, where she would sort of keep adult books, she would keep everything possible. And that's when I was born, in the early 90s, when she sort of set up for the first couple of years. And I mean, I love to tell people that I literally came out of a womb straight into a bookshop. That was literally my upbringing, so to speak. And every single day for me, coming back, and where I studied in school was literally walking distance from our shop. So every single day there was somebody who, from the shop, who would come to school. They would pick me up and they would bring me back to the shop. So I have these fond memories of sitting in boxes and sipping, a Campa Cola or a 7-Up, and reading, some magazine, or reading a new book or something like that. So that was sort of the beginning. And I think this arrangement continued till about 2011 or 2012. By that time, I was graduating high school as well. And then we moved to the current location, which I'm sitting in right now, where this is on the EM bypass. This is very close to ITC, Sonar Bangla, and Science City, for those who are familiar with the city. So we're here at this point. That's basically the origins. And after the year 2000, so I would say that, this entire time from the 90s till the pandemic hit, that was when she started specializing in children's books, and we were doing these pop-up school book fairs around the state of Bengal, where we would do about anything between 100 to 200 book fairs a year, during the season, where you would have these parent-teacher report card days, and parents would come in to interact with teachers and with administrators, and that's when we would go in, with our convertible racks, and we would set up, and we would, display books. So that continued all the way, I would say, till March 2020. That's when, everything had to change all over again. So I guess that would be a short way of describing the origins.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aman. Chetan, would you like to take over from here? I can see you. Chetan, you are on mute.
I think we can't hear him, as you can see him.
Or on mute, Chetan. Yeah. Yeah. We can hear you now.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. Hi.
Sorry about the delay.
That's fine. That's fine. No problem. You're a little inaudible. I can't hear you.
Is this better?
This is a little better. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the problem. So anyway, it's an amazing way to grow up.
Sorry, your voice is coming in and out. I can't hear you again.
I suggest you carry on with the conversation.
Sure.
Have something I'll jump in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that. Yeah. So Aman, that's a very interesting childhood, as you must have read in one of the comments also, that surrounded by books is like a dream childhood for a lot of us here. So how much do you read? One would definitely assume
Hardly anything at all. Hardly. In fact, when I saw that question, I started sort of smiling, because I figured I have a sort of answer for this. That I guess when I was growing up as a kid, I was one of those kids who could clock maybe 300-400 books a year. I've done that, as a child. At the time when it wasn't cool to, talk about how many books that you read in a year, I would really, really go through a lot of books as a kid. But over the years, I think my reading is really, really reduced. And that's also because I've just, gotten into an academic setting. So a lot of my reading is essentially academic now. I mean, if I'm doing any reading from the bookshop, then that's sort of complementing my research. In other words, I just don't have that time right now, to be able to do that kind of leisure reading. Most of my leisure reading probably comes from having to interview an author or to write a book review or something like that at this point. It's come to that now. But having said that, between myself and my mother, the two of us, my mother and I, the two of us, we do read a lot of children's books together, because we need to sort of keep recommending books to kids, and we need to recommending books to adults. And one thing we've also noticed is that people may not want to take recommendations from a physical bookseller anymore, because you have Goodreads now, or you have whatever on the internet to basically, where you can Google and find out about the book. So in fact, I noticed this for the first time at the Calcutta Book Fair this year, when we went back after a gap of more than a decade, where people were getting onto their phones. Of course, first they would check the price, and then the next thing they would do is they would sort of go through the entire review to see whether they're actually interested in the plot of the book. So that has sort of been one significant change, in this whole sort of tech thing that's going on right now, tech boom, so to speak, e-commerce boom with selling anything online.
So tell us about your relationship with your customers. Are there a core group of regulars? How interactive are they when they regularly visit?
Yeah, and I would also say that this core group of customers was earlier limited only to a lot of parents and a lot of children, but that sort of now expanded to a lot more adult customers, so to speak. It's like in the last 6 months to a year, we've started keeping a lot more what you would ideally see in a corporate bookshop, or what you would ideally see as a bestseller. We started keeping a few of those copies of each of those books, which we would ordinarily not keep at all. Or in case somebody wants it, we just fetch it for the person. It's not something that's on the shelves, but that's something that we started keeping a lot more, because we've started having a lot more general walk-ins, just because of the entire social media sort of presence, and constantly, hammering at it and going, where you basically have to wake up every morning and tell yourself it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. you have to post something, you have to constantly keep reminding people, that you are a physical location and you can deliver anywhere just the same as any other e-commerce website can. So yes, we do have, to circle back to your question again, we do have a lot of regular customers. A lot of them I would say are children. But nowadays we started having a lot of middle-aged, I would say college boys and girls and middle-aged young men and women, because suddenly we found that there's this entire frenzy for manga and anime comics, so there's this entire regular group of very serious manga readers who are constantly, looking at building their collection. So there's this entire eclectic mix of people that are coming into the bookshop now, so I guess that's a huge change from before, where earlier we would just say, okay, you know what, we do children's events, so we know that we have to spread out a carpet, we need to get some juice, we need to get some cake for kids, and we're done, basically, that's it. But that's not the case anymore now, because if we have, say, Kunal Basu wants to come because he's released a new book and he's supposed to be coming anytime soon, I can't have that sort of a setting for him. Or if I have somebody like Karuna Ezra Parekh coming because she's re-releasing her book as a paperback, then there needs to be a little bit more of a formal bookshop setup, for people. But it just seems like people love the whole homeliness of it, where basically we are a homestay bookstore. We live above the bookstop, the ground floor is a 1,500 square feet store, and we have 2 floors above this. So there have been instances where I have customers calling me up at 11:30 at night on a Sunday saying that I'm catching a 2 a.m. red eye to Tokyo, and I need to stop by a store and pick up, say, 10-15 books for a few friends. And he's an academic, he's a regular customer, and he says, I need to take some, I'm going for a conference, I cannot go empty-handed. And I also, apart from you giving me these books, I need you to sit and wrap them for me. So at 11:30 at night, we're sitting working on his selection, and one person is sitting and constantly packing up the books for him. I can't say no, because if for example, that hypothetically, if that person had a day or two, he would be sitting at that same time at night trying to buy it online, right? So I can't say no to a customer like that. So I guess that was just one of the benefits of living on the same property as your shop, where you basically have access to the book immediately. Whereas I've seen other booksellers, they're sitting at home and they get a sort of call from their customer saying, hey, I want to buy this, and then the bookseller goes, I need to go to my shop, so you need to give me this much time so that I finish everything at home. And then there are sort of drawbacks as well as good points of living in a homestay bookstore. But I would say there's a lot more memories being created in that sense, where you have this regular group of kids and you have this regular group of adults who are constantly, they want to come, they want to constantly circle back, they feel like we have a bunch of good recommendations. And of course, we're pet friendly. I don't know if there's any other pet friendly bookshops in the city. So a lot of people find this to be like a great opportunity and a safe space for them to bring their pets here. So we've encouraged people that why leave it at cats and dogs? If you have a bird that you want to bring, by all means do that. We try and accommodate that as well. So I guess that's the kind of relationship which we share. And my mom and I have also sort of noticed this, that we're a very, very tiny establishment. We don't have more than 4-5 people who we employ, and customers don't want to talk to our staff. They constantly ask, where's Mayura or where's Aman? They need to physically see us to feel validated to come to this physical shop, that I'm going there to meet them because I have this sort of parasocial relationship with them. And I want them to give me my next recommendation, or if I want to buy a book, I want them to hand it over to me. So that's very, very important, that sort of still exists. I can't quantify that for you. I cannot tell you, how many customers there are, what percentage has that jumped, but that's still at the core, of what we're doing.
So, Aman, we spoke about your customers. So, how is it with authors? Like, do you have a relationship with them, especially the first-time authors? Do you interact a lot or engage with them, and then do they keep coming back? And how does it work for authors?
Yeah, so now what's sort of happened is that, before I answer this question, I'll also explain to you how this kind of works in the publishing industry, at least the way I see it, is that when an author releases a book, months before the author releases the book, that person is already being pushed by the publisher to sort of push out, a pre-order link, which is essentially on an e-commerce site. So an X number of 100 copies have already presumed to be sold even before the book comes to physical shops. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when authors go to physical bookshops, they always come to the East last. I don't know what is this. I mean, there are a lot of ways of sort of explaining why this happens, but you will only see them go to Khan Market first. You will only see them go to Church Street first in Bangalore. You will only see them, go to the big corporate bookshops. And then when there is some budget left, oh, okay, let's also think about Calcutta. And then when they come to Calcutta, they only want to go to the corporate bookshops here. So then we have to constantly wave our hands and tell people that, hey, we too exist. We're on the way to the airport, so we'd love to have you come by, sign some copies. And then what sort of happens is now what we've started doing is we have this system where it just doesn't make any more sense for a physical bookshop to put up a copy of a book and say, this is available with me. That zamana is gone completely. If you're going to put up anything, it has to have a shopping link attached to it, because that's the norm. That's what has sort of been created by the e-commerce platform. So if I have, the author of Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh Khan visit me, and she signs like a bunch of copies for us, I sort of give this shopping link to her and I tell her that, hey, you have to help me. You have to go out there because you're the author, and you have to tell people to buy your book from me. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Otherwise it's just going to lie on my shelves, and then I'm going to have to return these signed copies, which is always a very sorry thing to do. So what we've done is we've sort of worked on this entire author signed copies thing. It has authors like Devdutt Patnaik who are right on top, or it has first-time authors, who just don't have that much of a social media following for that matter, because that is what seems to matter, right? That entire social media following. Yes and no, in my opinion. Yes, why? Because when a guy like Devdutt constantly tweets out my shopping link, I know I'm going to get a few sales. It's going to add up in the long run. No, why is that? Because even if it's a first-time author with not too many followers, so to speak, that first-time author can still spread the word among family and friends who would ideally be the first group of customers that would be interested in supporting and promoting that first-time author. So yes, it's very, very important for us to, sort of build relationships with authors. And it's even come to this point, which when we sit down with our social media calendar for the next week or for the next month, we always ensure to include the authors that have visited us. If somebody visited me 6 months back and I still have 5 copies left of that person's books, I'll make sure that the link is still live. And sometime on a slow Wednesday afternoon, when I really don't have anything going on, I'll push that picture out. So the author is also happy to see their picture there, and the authors are consequently going to reshare it for me. So that those relationships are extremely, extremely important, where you constantly have to keep reminding the author that, hey, please help me out a little bit. Please help me. I still have a few copies left, But that has worked wonders. It's worked very, very well for us, where, for example, we had this one guy who had maybe 50,000 followers on his Instagram, and he put it in his bio. He put our shopping link in his bio, and it just took like, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 days, and we were overwhelmed with 200 orders, which is, and this is in the middle of a pandemic, which is like insane numbers. Physical bookshops sitting outside NCR can never dream of doing these kind of numbers, honestly speaking. If you're not in Khan Market, you're not doing these kind of numbers. Like probably the only bookshops that can compare to that are maybe the ones on Church Street. Maybe they'll have the same volumes. I frankly, for the life of me, cannot think of anything apart from these 2 places which have those kind of numbers. So that was also sort of very that was a learning experience, so to speak. Like, or for example, during the pandemic, right when the pandemic started, we did a lot of free sessions where we had the authors come on board. We worked out Zoom links. We spoke to the schools that we worked to and everything, but the sales were not happening. What was happening is that 100 to 200, sometimes even 500-600 kids were coming onto an online session like this, but it wasn't converting into a sale even with a shopping link. So then what we started doing is that if you want to come on to this Zoom session with the author, you purchase a copy of the book, and I'm going to sell it to you at full price. There's no discount, there's nothing. If possible, I will try and give you a signed copy. If possible, I will even try and get it personalized for you. We do like a bunch of things like that. But if you're going to invest yourself in the author's story, then pay for it. Respect the author's time, respect the bookshop's time, because I mean, you still have to, sort of constantly remind people that we have expenses too. It's not just, and none of us, in fact, one of our partner bookshops in the Independent Bookshops Association of India actually posted, he tweeted recently thinking that everybody thinks that bookshop owners are really, really rich, because we sell so many books. But I mean, that's really not the case, especially when you're an independent entity. There is a huge difference between me picking up 10 copies of Amitabh Ghosh's next book and a corporate picking up 500 copies. Amitabh Ghosh is never going to visit me. He's going to be told by his publisher that these guys in Calcutta have picked up 500 copies. Jaiye unke paas, wahan pe signing kariye. So everybody will come there. And what happens is half the people who come there, even to the corporate bookshop to get their copies signed, they've already bought it off Amazon. They're not going to wait to come physically to the corporate shop to pick it up, right? So a lot of these sort of complications also come in with that. And yeah, we really, really have to work very closely with that. And so throughout the pandemic, now it doesn't happen anymore. Now we've completely stopped doing online sessions, but at least that 1.5, 2 years, when we made it mandatory for people to buy the book, they started giving us very funny looks. The whole world is doing free sessions. Why should we, purchase a copy from you? So we sort of said, okay, I mean, if you don't want to come for it, don't come for it. That was the attitude at the beginning. And it took some time to sort of educate the customer about the whole thing. And the numbers, of course, did drop. But then I was being guaranteed 30 to 50 sales every single time I did an online session, which for me was very, very important to sort of keep that cash register ticking, So then what we started doing was that apart from the daily sales which we were having, we used to look forward to doing this 2-3 times a month, where we would plan it out. And then we would tell Devdutt that, look, we want to do this book of yours. Let's do a session for children. I'm going to push out a bunch of shopping links. You send me a video. Let's work on a few social media registrations with that, where we did one with him. Or say we did one with another bunch of different authors, with kidlit authors, where we would constantly tell them that, look, we want to do this. We need a good 2-3 weeks to try and get, those many entries, because it's very slow. The first week or 2 weeks, people will say, acha hai, session hai, session hai. And then finally towards the end, all the entries start coming in. And then overnight, you have so many entries, Like I remember one session we did with Devdutt, which he had come out with these flashcards, which was the story of the Ramayana told in flashcards, or the story of any epics told in flashcards for children. It was like a family game for everybody to play. And we didn't do much sales, and we only had about 15-20 entries on the eve of the event. And then he sends me this really nice video, which he's sort of showing all the 3 different cards. One was Vahanas, the vehicles of the gods. One was the Mahabharata. One was the Ramayana. And it was just a really nice video, which we put up on Instagram. And overnight, we had about 60 to 65 more entries. We ended up with 90 entries overnight, and then we were sort of scrambling that, do we have enough cards to send out to so many customers in different cities, So those experiences were great, to sort of try and build those relationships, not only, as you said, with the authors, but we're also simultaneously building relationships with a lot of these customers. First-time customers who will come to me on the reference of that author. Again, whether big author, big name author, or whether small name author. Let's not even call them big name, small name author, in that sense, where that author's contact comes to us, or that author's patron comes to us and says that, I want to be part of your session. But not only do I want to be part of your session, I also want to support you by buying books from you. So they're buying the book for the session, as well as they said, send me another bunch of books, So that was also kind of helping us go, at a time which we couldn't leave our property, where everybody was just indoor. And like I said, the advantage of being a homestay bookstore, Amphan knocked out our electricity for nearly a week, and under candlelight, we were still selling books physically. We were still making physical bills, and we were still sending out books via Swiggy Genie and stuff like that, So some crazy experiences, I would say.
Wow, that's all I can say. So I'm very curious, Aman, do you get to choose particular titles, or do you go through them and, like, say you've seen something very interesting and you enjoyed, you or maybe Mayura, your mother, have enjoyed that book and you decided to post something about it?
It goes both ways. You see, the problem here is, and I call this a big problem which needs a lot of fixing. I don't know how much the publishers are paying attention to this, is that when you see, I'll compare it to the movie industry. Movie industry, whether it's the Netflix or whether it's a, you know, a full-fledged release in the theater, they always choose a Friday, or they always choose a holiday, or they always choose that. But the book industry, every single day you look left, right, and center, somebody is releasing a new book. You know, so the book which is in Khan market right now is not going to reach me for another 6 or 7 days. So jisko kharidna hai has already bought it from Khan market, or they've already bought it on that online pre-order kind of a thing. So what we do is, the first thing we do is that, okay, if it's a new release, we have to make sure to get a bunch of copies of it, because there will be an audience for it. And it's not only limited to children's books, or it's not only limited to, you know, biographies or whatever. If it's a business title, if it's an Indira Nui, or if it's, you know, an Arundhati Bhattacharya, we get those books. I'm not saying we don't. We ensure that, dekho ye naya release aaya hai, we better make sure that there are a couple of copies in the shop, because somebody will ask for it naturally. So that's one way where you somehow try and keep track of the new releases that come, where you have 6 or 7 core publishers that you work with, or, you know, and you're either getting their books directly, or you're getting their books, you know, through their affiliate distributors, and you're just basically constantly in this rat race, you know, constantly ki aaya ki nahi aaya, you know, that kind of a thing. One. And the second thing is the curation, which basically Mayura does a lot. What she does is, she'll get these highly, what I would call, inaccessible Excel sheets, you know, from the publishers, and she sits under candlelight. I mean, she has this tenacity to go into late into the night till about 3-4 a.m. sometimes, and she's picking out specific titles that she likes. And then these titles are basically her selection, which comes to the bookshop. And then what we're trying to do is that on our social media, we're trying to focus on 2 things. One is we're trying to keep up with the publisher juggernaut of new arrival, you know, that continuously goes on and on. And the second thing is this curated selection that she pulls out. How does that work for her? She'll be able to answer that question. You know, I mean, I just feel like being able to look at a book and pick it out and know that it's going to sell. I have recognized that talent. There are very, very few people in India who have that talent. And I would say Mayura is one of them, you know, where she can look at a book and tell you ki dekho ye bikne wala hai, isko aap rakh do, 10-15 copies, you better get to the shop, you know, that kind of a thing. I've seen that with quite a few people. I've seen that with Mr. Baharisan. I've seen that with I've probably seen that with Chris Bookworm, definitely, where he really knows what he's doing. You know, he knows what books are going to move. They just sort of feel the pulse of it. You know, they know that, okay, this is going to be a next big release title. We need to try and move X number of titles, or we need to try and, you know, do an event with the publisher or the author where we can try and move X number of titles. So the selection process, I guess, varies for independent bookseller to independent bookseller. Everybody's got their own quirks as an individual. Everybody's got their own likes and dislikes, politically, socially, culturally, you know, so people are going to pick books in that way. And also what happens is that inevitably, because of publisher pressure, a lot of us end up keeping the mainstream bestsellers. You know, that is dumped on us whether we like it or not. There are quite a few authors which a lot of, I'm not going to name them, but there are quite a few authors that a lot of bookshops just don't want to keep, because it doesn't make any sense for us to keep it. These are those ultra big name authors that are only going to sell online. So what, I mean, it really doesn't make any sense for me to be wasting my storage space keeping those kind of titles. But again, to answer your question in a nutshell, it goes both ways. You do have to try and keep up with the current trends of the mainstream, as well as you have to try and curate as much as possible as you can. The next objective, I guess, for a lot of us would be to see if we can, the little online space that we've sort of created to sell books, every independent bookseller, can you sort of make that as curated as possible, where you don't want to have new arrivals the way you see on the front page of an e-commerce site. You want to basically curate that as much as possible to make that attractive to your customer, or be like, hey, I want to check this website out, you know?
So Aman, I want to ask you a question. It's not a part of the list that Chetan had shared.
Please, go ahead. That's fine.
So do you accept books directly from authors? Because now that it's self-publishing options are there, there are a lot of, I'm sure there are a lot of authors who would be interested in knowing this, and if yes, how can one get their books
The
placed in
best thing to do is to get in touch with Mayura, because she takes care of the account. She takes care of. I'm more of the marketing side and the PR of the bookshop. So she's the best person. Just email her on bookstore.storyteller@gmail.com. That would just be the best way to introduce yourself with your book and to sort of just check with her and everything. Because I mean, there are a few. Until late, the answer is no. We had not been accepting self-published books, but of late we have accepted a couple of self-published books. It's a very sort of entirely based on whether Mayura wants to keep it in the shop or not. Because again, the same thing applies. It doesn't matter if it's a big author, small author, self-published author, or a mainstream published author. You have to help us move that. If you feel that you can help us move those copies, great, we'd love to keep it. Because it's the way our model works. We cannot wait for customers and patrons to come to us. That never happens. We have to basically take books to customers. So that has not changed, whether it's like a home delivery online thing or whether us physically going. In fact, as we speak right now, Mayura is doing an event with Rijula Das, a death in Sonagachi, at a cafe in South Calcutta, where she said, look, I need to go and take a bunch of books there and see if we can make some sales. So we were discussing, how do we want to do the display, how do we want to make it attractive for people. So that is always an ongoing process. Like the one thing that independent booksellers will always tell you, no matter where in the world is, we cannot wait for customers to come to us. That is even more so important in 2022.
Thank you, Aman. Now we'll open the floor to questions, and we already have one question from Shalini. She wants to know, for storage space, does a bookstore have defined contracts and understanding with publishers?
This applies only to corporate bookshops, and this applies only to the airport bookshops, where I'm sure all of you know by now, if you want to be on a shelf, you have to pay for it. Like if you want to be like in the top 10, you have to pay every month. It goes into 30, 40, 50,000 rupees a month. There's like a full bidding process from publisher to publisher. So this applies only to, I mean, ideally, if you ask me, yeah, I would love to do that. I would love to tell a publisher that if you want to keep your books here, you have to pay me for it, but that's not realistic. So we don't have any of those kind of binding contracts. If we don't want to work on a book, if we don't want to work on something, we just say no. Because at the end of the day, I'm sorry to sound crude when I say this, but tomorrow, if independent bookshops shut down, publishers would be the happiest. They don't have to work on any physical accounts. They just sell from one place. They sell from two big e-commerce websites, so it just makes life easier for them. Like when publishers have to work with independent shops, they are under this intense pressure that just make sure that the independent bookshop puts up, like a picture saying that, the book is available at the shop or the author has visited, and that's gone on to their publisher WhatsApp group. That's it. That's the end of their job. That's how they're earning their salary. Then everything else is up to you entirely, how you want to sell, how you want to return the books or whatever.
Anybody else wants to ask anything? Yeah. How can a publisher support independent bookstores? Is this different for the big ones and the independent publishers?
It is very different. It is extremely different. I mean, it's how can a publisher support independent bookshops? They can give you the answers themselves. I mean, I don't need to go into the details of this, but I mean, start by giving us a little bit. Actually, you see, the answer is very complex. It's not only a publisher problem, but it's also an indie bookshop problem. Where I actually wrote about this for Scroll a while ago, where I had written a piece. I was writing about the Marathi publishing industry and what are the repercussions of COVID's second wave on the Marathi publishing industry. And translation, it was really, really ugly. It literally put the entire vernacular industry on a ventilator. It was really, really bad based on the kind of the responses that I got from people. And the main crux of that story, well, what I was trying to report in that piece was that indie booksellers or physical, and this applies not only to booksellers per se, this applies to anybody with a retail business in this country or in South Asia for that matter. You are being forced to overnight unlearn what you already know and get into an online space. Because unless you are in an online space, this is not going to happen for you. And for a lot of these people, it doesn't only mean sitting on a computer and getting onto WordPress or Wix and adding like a PayPal to it and saying, hey, chalo kitab bechte hain. There's a lot of learning for them to do in terms of technical know-how. There's a lot of, sort of, you see there are a lot of different things, a lot of different ways to answer this. I mean, when a book comes out, then a publisher will choose only a select number of bookshops, and then they'll tag them, so, and then they will only choose those authors and tag them. Now, what has become so important is your social media following. How many followers do you have? Because like, for example, there is this one online bookshop that doesn't have a physical presence, but Mayura and I have very enviously been looking at their model, and we hope to emulate them eventually. Is that I think they have 30,000-40,000 followers, and I do suspect that some of them allow at least a certain percent of those are paid followers, right, which they bought or something. Yeah. But having said that, what happens is that having those number of followers, they put up only select number of titles, and they don't put it up on a daily basis the way a physical bookshop does. The way you see Bahari Sons putting up books 7 days a week, they will not do that. But what they will do is they'll put up select titles, and they'll put it up once every 10 days, once every 20 days. And for each title, they get 50 to 60 orders because of their social media following. So you want to try and continue with your physical stuff because you have a physical store, because you have the advantage of a physical store where you have authors coming in, where you have walk-ins coming in, but you also have to sort of force yourself overnight to adapt to this online thing, because this is not going to stop anytime soon. You can, I mean, look, you can unionize, you can take this to the Supreme Court, you can argue for a minimum sale price of books, you can say there's predatory pricing, you can do all those things. You can have everything even perhaps work out in your favor also in that sense, and have like a minimum pricing put on books, but you still have to be able to sell them online. And that is a huge, huge step for a lot of indie bookshops that have never done it before. Ab agar website lagaoge bhi, so then how many titles am I going to put on my website? How am I going to constantly keep changing my front page like it's the front page of a journalism website on a day-to-day basis, where I have to put new arrivals, I have to put new banners. This becomes complex because first you thought I just need to chadao a website. Now I need an illustrator. Now I need a web editor, so there's so many things to sort of learn along that way that unless you actually have somebody with that sort of a technical know-how background, it makes things very, very difficult going forward. I think there's a question here.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for a first-time author who's traditionally published, but maybe with a second-time publisher? This is go out and make friends with all the indie bookshops and sort of convince them in individual capacities to, when you say advice, do you mean writing advice or do you mean selling advice? Selling advice.
Selling, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I think you have to constantly build this sort of social following, and you have to that's why they say, right, in the publishing industry, if you're a first-time author who's come in with 40,000-50,000 followers, they are very happy with that because kitab apne aap bik jayegi. That's what they generally like to say. But at least for a first-time author, you have to keep that social media juggernaut ticking. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, would be my advice to you, where you have to sort of use a mix of not only online, but also use the mix of physical, where you can constantly tell people, if you're in this city, buy my book. One suggestion I would have for it's a bit cumbersome, but if you can do it, if I'm guessing a lot of authors now have their own personal websites. So they should basically have one tab which opens up to the contact details of all the bookshops that have their books. And maybe keep pushing that link out, tell people, buy my books from a physical store, buy my book from a physical store, or this is the particular shopping link to buy it from this particular thing. So that is pretty helpful, to constantly do that. And what also does happen is there is this little bit of fatigue that sets in. Yeah. Where you're constantly trying as a first-time author, aapke paas ek hi kitab hai, 300-page novel that you've written. It's a good book. It's sold well from your publisher. But what's happened is that ki 6 mahina ho gaya hai, and everybody in your life knows ki you have written this book. Now what do you do? Now how do you sort of reinvent that social media juggernaut? Then you have to sort of think of ways to be a little bit more inventive and to keep that going. Take a few quotes out, illustrate a few pages, get a few, people. You have to make it a little bit more interactive. So The same challenge that an independent bookshop sort of has trying to convince their customers to buy is the same challenge that an author, a first-time author, will also have, continuously trying to push out copies. Giveaway आप एक बार कर सकते हो. You do collaborative posts with your authors एक बार. You can do maybe a video talking about this being my book, please buy it ek baar. You can push out a couple of the social media links ek baar. But I guess the two pieces of advice I would have is, number one, have a social media calendar for this so you can plan things out, and the second thing is it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
All right, thanks.
I want to just ask a little more connected question, Aman. So say, for example, Chetan is Delhi based. So like what they say usually in marketing that, you have a home turf and then you have places where people don't know you. Like maybe people down south don't know Chetan as an author. Or maybe in Kolkata, he does not have a social. Would you recommend some author actually venturing into an area or a city or doing some marketing activity, like considering Kolkata, like you just said, as an option?
Yeah, you have to do that. You have to
even
do that.
Even when they don't have their own circles, they are relying on independent bookstores for this completely.
You have to do something like that. Like what I've actually noticed is, a lot of these big name authors, I'll take the example of somebody who I've worked closely with for a while. I worked with Papa CJ when Westland released his book. I very carefully noticed his social media. I very carefully noticed his mannerisms. I noticed, what he was sort of doing. For 6 to 8 to 10 months, there were regular articles coming out in the papers. Of course, those articles were coming out because he was a famous, well-known corporate comedian who had written a book, right? That was the sort of angle. But that worked for him. Like he figured what worked for him and he kept, hammering at that one thing. Now I will make sure that I'm covered in NCR. Now I will make sure that I'm covered in Bombay. Now I will make sure I'm covered in the East. Now this is how I'll make sure that I'm going to be tried and, sort of covered in the South. So that is very, very helpful if you can sort of build this, not only media coverage network. Your publishers can definitely help you with that because they're the first people to always reach out, to journalists, please cover the book. That's one. And the second thing is physically getting to these, even if you cannot physically get to these bookshops, what happens is connect to these bookshops. I'll be happy to get you in touch with the bookshops that you may not have heard of or introduce you to anybody else. And tell them I'd like to send you 5 copies or 10 copies of my book. May I please send it to you? And once they're okay with it, then you can maybe, ask them for like, an image of the book displayed in your shop or something in their shop. And that's when you keep reminding people constantly, so that's a good idea. You have how many you have, maybe including, forget only the metro cities. You have even the mini metros. If you have bookshops in Ahmedabad, if you have bookshops in Indore, if you have bookshops in Pune, you can actually build an entire social media calendar for 6 months just on the independent bookshops based across India, and tell them ki, today in Bangalore, my book was spotted here. Today in Pune, my book was spotted here, so that is also sort of very helpful. So just sort of building that network pan India, I don't think that really matters. That has less to do with your, what do you call, success as an author, but has more to do with your networking, in my opinion.
Completely agree.
Yeah, it is actually eventually, Shalini ma'am, it does become self-distribution because the publisher is not going to care about you 3-4 months after your book is published or after your budget has been exhausted, as crude as that sounds, so that is something that you have to do on your. I've actually noticed a lot of writers do this on their own, especially the full-time ones. Devda does it entirely himself. He knows ki mera Rupa ka ye kitab nikalne wala hai in the next few months. I need to start doing the promotions entirely by myself right now. This is my shopping link. This is my own copy of the book. Here's why you should read the book. He'll do a couple of Insta lives. He'll say, go back to my bio, start reordering the book or whatever. Or say if he's written a book on Shivji and you have a festival that's sort of coming, he ensures to make sure that there is a post that's put out and there is a shopping link that's put out there. So they have their ways and means of doing this, or say, for example, if you take into consideration Jhumpa Lahiri, whoever handles Jhumpa Lahiri's PR, I'm sure she doesn't do it on her own. But if you come to the publication date of the Lowlands, or if you come to like the day which she won the Pulitzer or whichever, they're always ensuring to do this on this day kind of post, and hey, by the way, if you don't have copies, or if you'd like to replace your copy from 10 years ago, you can buy it here. This is the link, so those kind of things you have to sort of do on your own. Publishers are not going to do it for you. And this is where independent bookshops can actually come into help, where if you can keep your rapport going with them, like I'm doing it constantly here, where I'm constantly trying to reach out. Like I explained to you, I have this full section of books which is just author signed copies. And even 6 months down the line, I'm reaching out to this gentleman who has an Instagram account called Bong Sense. He's basically he's a STEM PhD, and he's settled in Singapore. But on the side, he likes to make cartoons talking about the different caricatures of being Bengali and the Bengali culture. So he's got like a following of 40,000 people on Instagram, because the visuals work very well on Instagram. But I constantly text him saying, please push out my link. This is the picture. Please tell people that we have some copies available. So those kind of things constantly help, where if you can convince an indie shop that once in 2 weeks, once in 3 weeks, constantly just put out a post reminding people, because there'll always be somebody who has absent-mindedly forgotten about your book sometime down the line, and then be like, okay, now I have the time, space, and energy, and I want to spend the money, I will buy this book. So I guess it sort of depends on that as well.
Sure. So that's been very, very informative, actually. Anybody else would like to ask something?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. No, I don't want to ask anything. That was my question. But this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time, Aman.
Absolutely.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for the platform, and thank you so much for constantly amplifying all the independent bookshop posts. I keep seeing you guys retweeting all our posts. So I mean, we have to get the conversation out there. We have to tell people that, look, we're not dinosaurs. We are still as relevant as we were 10 years ago. When I think it's important. What is sort of very challenging to do is to constantly inform the customer that, look, when you buy a book, you're not just buying it because it's a cheaper book. I know this is going to sound like such a broken tape recorder kind of a thing, but we're constantly trying to tell customers that, look, we pay our taxes, and we are constantly trying to contribute to the local community. There are a lot of different things that that a bookshop can still do. I think we're still trying to focus on that. Like, for example, if you've heard of the Scottish picture book writer Rod Campbell, who's written Dear Zoo, famous Dear Zoo book. His birthday is on the 7th of May. So we wanted to sort of do an event centered around his birthday, where we get a couple of kids to come to the shop. They cut a cake, they do like a few craft activities. And then what we're trying to do is we're trying to see if we can get somebody from Rod Campbell's team to come on to like an online thing from the UK and talk to the kids for 15-20 minutes, maybe field some questions. I think those kind of sessions are very similar to what I even grew up doing in the British Council. I don't know if those, happen anymore, but maybe trying to replicate that, hoping that maybe 10 years down the line, the child would still want to come back to this bookshop. We're trying to sort of, as in corporate speak, create customers for life, so to speak. I think there's a question here. 1 second. Yeah, Richard, we did, like I said, we've just kept, in fact, we've kept 2 or 3 self-published books right now. And we worked very closely with the authors, where they are constantly reminding people that books are available with us. And both of them, in fact, have decent social media followings on Facebook and Instagram. That helps, always helps when you have something north of 2,000-3,000 followers, to constantly remind your followers every couple of weeks that, a copy of mine is here. That definitely helps quite a bit, But then I guess it also really becomes complex. As an author, do you want to make money, or do you want to push your book out? Those are 2 completely different things as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Aman. This has been awesome. I'm going to, I just wanted to take the last 5 minutes and chat with everybody. We are at
Yeah, sure.
our last week. You're welcome to stick around. I'm not asking you to leave. But yes, whenever or if ever I'm in Calcutta next, I will definitely stop by your store and buy books.
Sure, absolutely. Please do.
There is, yeah, I love going to bookstores and, Blossoms and even Bahari Sons. Bahari Sons now has one and multiple small indie bookstores as well, which are there in different parts. So yeah, love going to those. I was looking at the tracker, guys. So one more week to go now, everybody. We are at about 80,000 words. We have another 6 days to go. So if you're working on something, this is the home stretch. This is the last week that we have. First, maybe just do the closure call, which is usually like 20 minutes. So yeah, give it your best shot. Anything you want to chat about. I'm sorry, I've been a little. One day I think I missed the writing prompt, but that's because I was having such a blast. We had Arundhati Subramaniam at the retreat, and I was helping her. And I was kind of, the chief flunky to Arundhati, and she was teaching poetry masterclass, so it was fantastic. But because of that, I was a little distracted. So sorry about that. But yeah, so any questions? Anybody want to chat? Anybody want to talk about something on how this month has been FTC? Yeah, Sharani, go for it.
I haven't been writing and tracking, but I want to thank Aman and I want to thank both of you for having him here. I think this was a wish list that I had added.
This was your request. Yes,
yes,
that is right.
So for me, the FDC is always about, these little wish lists. So thank you. This has been an absolutely fabulous session. Yeah. I haven't been writing as much as I should have. So no comments there.
That's okay. Any other questions? Good to see you, Ram.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that thing about blossoms. I love blossoms, man. I've been there multiple times myself. But जब जाता हूँ तो मतलब 2 झोले bags full of books is what
that place is magical.
Invariably walking out after 3 hours.
Yeah.
I normally walk out with some 2 cartons usually.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And I discovered new authors there. I'd not read Nadine Gordimer. I discovered that there. A lot of new books, a lot of new authors which I had not read. You go in there and you just lose yourself, and then you pick up something because it seems interesting. So yeah. But I'm very keen to visit Aman's shop as well, Storyteller. Should
Absolutely.
be great to go there and take a look.
Wonderful session. Thank you very much, Aman.
Yes. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll call it today. Yeah. All right. So home stretch, guys. थोड़ा सा अभी रगड़ाई करते हैं. ठीक है. I'll be regular with the writing prompts. We'll meet again on the 1st then.
All the best with your writing, and thank you so much. Have a good week ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aman. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.